I never considered myself the jealous or overly suspicious type. My wife, Jessica, and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We met in college. She was the loud, fiery girl who always knew how to be the center of attention, and I was the quiet, steady one who balanced her out. People always said we were the perfect match, that I kept her grounded while she made sure I didn't disappear into the background. And for a long time, I believed that too. Sure, we had our share of fights. She could be short-tempered, selfish at times, and I had a habit of shutting down when things got too overwhelming, but nothing ever seemed beyond repair. At least, that's what I thought. But lately, something had shifted. At first, I brushed it off, blaming stress or routine or whatever excuse seemed most reasonable. But as the weeks went on, the feeling of unease crept in like a slow poison, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just in my head anymore. I could feel the distance between us like a physical thing. It started small. The way she became suddenly possessive of her phone, always keeping it face down, silencing notifications, taking it with her even when she just went to the bathroom. She'd always been casual with it before, leaving it lying around or asking me to check her messages while she was driving, but now it was glued to her hand like a lifeline. Then there were the nights out, more of them, more frequent than ever before. She'd started going out with her friends, or at least that's what she told me, but whenever I asked who she was meeting, the answers felt vague, scripted even. "Oh, just some work girls," she'd say, never mentioning any names, always in a rush to move the conversation along. She stopped asking if I wanted to come, stopped sending me the little drunk texts she used to send before, the ones that said she missed me or couldn't wait to come home. And then there were the subway rides, the thing that made my stomach churn the most. Jessica never used to take the subway, always opting for an Uber or driving herself. But one day, out of nowhere, she told me she had started using it to people watch and unwind after work. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me, but I let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking. Still, the details never added up. Whenever I casually asked how her ride home was, she'd get vague and distracted. "Oh, just the usual," she'd say before changing the subject. It didn't help that her schedule suddenly seemed unpredictable. Some nights she'd come home at a reasonable hour, other nights much later, with flimsy excuses about delays or last-minute stops. But the real alarm bells went off when I accidentally came across her MetroCard transaction history. Jessica isn't the most tech-savvy person. She leaves browser tabs open for weeks, forgets passwords constantly, and barely understands half the apps on her phone. So when I saw her MetroCard history open on our shared iPad, I clicked on it, not even thinking much of it. That was when my stomach dropped. She wasn't just taking the subway home from work. She was making trips during the day, sometimes early in the morning, well before she had to be at the office. Some days, she didn't use it at all. Other days, she had multiple swipes, all from the same station, in a part of town where she had no reason to be. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was running errands. Maybe she had work meetings in a different location. But the excuses felt hollow, even as I told them to myself. Something was off, and I needed to know what. The next morning, I decided to test her. I told her I had an all-day meeting at work and wouldn't be able to talk much. Instead, I called in sick, grabbed a cup of coffee, and made my way to the subway station where her card had been swiped so often. I sat at a small cafe across the street, pretending to work on my laptop while keeping my eyes fixed on the entrance. I felt ridiculous, like some paranoid husband in a bad movie, but deep down, I knew I had to see it for myself. I waited for almost an hour, my heart pounding in my chest with each passing minute, until finally, I saw her. Jessica walked into the station, and instantly, I knew something was wrong. She wasn't dressed for work, at least, not in the way she usually was. She had on tight jeans, a low-cut top, her hair done, makeup fully applied in a way she never bothered with for me anymore. But it wasn't just the outfit, it was her entire demeanor. She looked excited, giddy. She kept glancing at her phone, her fingers fidgeting, pacing near the entrance like she was waiting for something or someone. And then, he arrived. A tall man, dressed in dark clothes, hood up, hands stuffed into his pockets. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance around nervously like someone trying to avoid being seen. He walked straight up to her like he belonged there, like this was routine, like she was his. And Jessica, my wife, lit up the second she saw him. I felt like the breath had been knocked out of my lungs. She didn't hesitate. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his without a second thought, and together, they disappeared into the subway station. I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. My hand shook as I stared at the place where she had just been, my coffee long forgotten. My mind raced with every possible explanation, every desperate excuse I could come up with. But there was no mistaking what I had just seen. Jessica wasn't just cheating. She was living a whole other life. And I had no idea who this man was. I don't remember how long I sat there, my mind reeling, my hands gripping the coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. The image of Jessica slipping her fingers so effortlessly into his, like it was second nature, played in my head on an endless loop. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a misunderstanding, and it sure as hell wasn't something I could brush off as innocent. She was his. That much was clear. The way she looked at him, eyes bright, lips slightly parted in a smile she hadn't given me in years, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, was meeting another man in secret, and the casual ease of it all made my skin crawl. How long had this been going on? Who the hell was he? And how did I not see this coming? I don't know what possessed me, but I found myself moving before I even made the conscious decision to do so. My legs carried me forward, into the subway station, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. I didn't even have a plan. What was I going to do? Chase after them? Confront her right then and there, in public, in front of 100 strangers who had no idea they were about to witness a man's world collapse? The thought made me feel sick, but I had to know. My hand shook as I swiped my Metro card and pushed through the turnstile, my eyes darting wildly around the platform. I spotted them almost immediately. They stood near the far end, partially tucked away from the crowd but not nearly hidden enough for someone doing something they should feel guilty about. Jessica was close to him, so close that her body was angled toward his in a way that screamed intimacy. He leaned down slightly, whispering something into her ear, and she laughed. Laughed. A real, full, unguarded laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. It felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I gripped the cold metal railing beside me, forcing myself to breathe, to stay calm, to not do anything reckless. This wasn't a case of a single mistake, some heat of the moment lapse in judgment. This was something else entirely. There was a comfort between them, a familiarity that couldn't be explained away by anything other than the cold, brutal truth. This wasn't new. This wasn't the beginning of something. This had been happening right under my nose for God knows how long. I stayed back, watching as they boarded a train together, and for a brief moment, I had the overwhelming urge to follow them, to see where they went, how far this little secret of theirs stretched. But I didn't. I was barely keeping it together as it was, and the last thing I needed was to do something stupid in public. Instead, I let the train doors close behind them, standing frozen on the platform, watching as they disappeared into the dark tunnel, along with whatever illusion I had left about my marriage. I walked back up to the street in a daze, my body on autopilot, my mind racing through every possible scenario. What now? Confront her? Pretend I didn't see anything and dig deeper? Find more proof? No, that wasn't an option. I had seen enough. That night, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I needed to process, to figure out my next move. When she came home, much later than usual, of course, she acted completely normal, as if she hadn't just spent the afternoon wrapped around another man. She kissed me on the cheek, something she hadn't done in months, and sighed dramatically as she kicked off her heels. Ugh, work was brutal today, she said, stretching her arms over her head, looking exhausted in a way that was almost convincing. Almost. I stared at her, my stomach twisting at how easily she lied. How smoothly the words came out of her mouth without even a flicker of hesitation. How many times had she done this? How many times had she walked through that door, kissed me, curled up in bed next to me, while carrying the scent of someone else on her skin? I forced myself to respond, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Yeah? What happened? She groaned, rolling her eyes, launching into some bullshit story about an issue with a client, the details vague and just specific enough to sound believable. I nodded along, pretending to listen, pretending to care, pretending I didn't know the truth. And that's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to blow up on her, not yet. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing how badly she had broken me, not before I had everything I needed. Because this wasn't just about the cheating anymore. It was about the lie, the years, the months, the days of deception, of standing in front of me and pretending to be someone she clearly wasn't. If she could lie this easily, how much more was there? What else had she kept from me? So I waited. Over the next few days, I played the part of the clueless husband while I started digging. I checked her Metro card swipes again, this time cross-referencing them with her supposed work schedule. I paid attention to her texts, to the way she guarded her phone, The way she'd leave the room every time a notification popped up. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I accessed our home security system and started checking the surveillance footage. We had cameras set up at the front door and in the hallway outside our apartment, something we installed years ago after a break-in down the block. I never paid much attention to them before. Why would I? We lived in a safe neighborhood, and I trusted my wife. Or at least, I used to. What I found made my blood turn ice cold. Jessica had brought him here. To our home. The place we built together. The place I had always considered ours. There, on the grainy security footage, was my wife, unlocking our front door in the middle of the afternoon, stepping aside to let the same tall, dark-clothed man follow her inside. It wasn't just once. It wasn't even twice. It was several times over the past few weeks. Always during the day, when she thought I was at work. Always with the same routine, glancing over her shoulder before stepping inside with him. Like some scene from a fucking movie. I stared at the screen, my hands clenched into fists, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I had given her everything. My time, my love, my trust. And she had walked through our front door with another man, bringing him into the space where we ate, where we laughed, where we slept. There was no coming back from this. I wasn't just watching a betrayal unfold. I was staring at the wreckage of my entire marriage. For the next 2 days, I walked around like a ghost, barely holding myself together while I plotted my next move. The surveillance footage had confirmed what I already knew, but seeing it, watching my wife unlock our front door for another man, letting him into the space that was supposed to be ours, turned something inside me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was pure, calculated disrespect. She hadn't just been sneaking around behind my back. She had been bold enough to bring him here, to the place where we had built a life together, and then come home to me every night as if nothing had happened. The lies were endless, effortless, and now that I was seeing the full picture, I realized how blind I had been. I wondered how many times she had looked me in the eye and laughed to herself, knowing she had just been with him, knowing I had no idea. The rage burned hot beneath my skin, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break anything. I wasn't going to let her twist this into my fault. No, I was going to confront her on my terms, when she least expected it, and watch her scramble for a way out. The opportunity presented itself the following evening. Jessica came home late again, breezing through the door with the same practiced ease, shrugging off her coat and tossing her bag onto the counter. I watched her carefully, studying her movements, the way she avoided my gaze just enough to be noticeable. "Hey," she said, sounding casual, too casual. "Long day." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, waiting for her to make a move. She leaned against the kitchen island, stretching her arms over her head, letting out a sigh that was meant to sound exhausted, but, to me, now just felt like a performance. God, you wouldn't believe the day I had. Work has been crazy lately. You know how it is. I nearly laughed at the audacity of it all. Instead, I just folded my arms and let the silence stretch between us, watching as a flicker of something, nervousness, maybe, passed across her face. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, measured, not giving anything away just yet. "Yeah? Crazy how?" She blinked at me, hesitating for just a second, before launching into some nonsense about a difficult client, about how her boss had been piling more work on her, about how she was just so exhausted from everything. She spoke quickly, filling the air with words that meant nothing, and all I could do was stare at her, my stomach twisting with disgust. It was almost impressive, really, how effortlessly the lies rolled off her tongue, how convincing she sounded, if I hadn't already seen the truth for myself. But I had, and I wasn't playing along anymore. I waited until she finished her little speech before I finally pulled out my phone, unlocking it with deliberate slowness, making sure she saw what I was doing. Then, without a word, I turned the screen toward her and hit play. The grainy black and white footage of her and him stepping into our apartment filled the silence between us, the timestamp glaring at the bottom of the screen like a slap in the face. I watched her face carefully, saw the way her expression froze the second she realized what she was looking at. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. For the first time in a long time, Jessica was speechless. I let the video play for a few more seconds before locking my phone and setting it down on the counter. "Want to try that again?" My voice was low, even, and I could see the way it rattled her. She opened her mouth again, but still, nothing came out, her eyes darting from me to the phone and back again, her brain scrambling for a way to explain the inexplicable. Then, like clockwork, the act began. She scoffed, rolling her eyes, her lips curling into something that might have been an attempt at amusement. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. "Are you seriously spying on me now? That's insane, you know that." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Spying? That's the card she wanted to play? She really thought she could flip this on me. Spying, I repeated, leaning forward slightly, resting my palms on the counter as I looked her dead in the eye. "No, Jessica. I wasn't spying. I was just finally paying attention." Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. I could see the gears turning in her head, see her trying to figure out the best way to slither out of this. She let out a short, frustrated sigh, crossing her arms over her chest like she was the one who had a right to be angry. "I can't believe you would actually invade my privacy like that," she snapped, her voice rising now. "Jesus, do you even hear yourself? You're acting like a complete psycho right now." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She was grasping, trying to regain control of the situation, but it was slipping through her fingers faster than she could catch it. I let her rant, let her throw out accusations, let her perform. But when she finally stopped, I just shook my head and grabbed my phone again, this time pulling up another clip, one of her and him, on the subway platform, holding hands, laughing. I turned the screen back toward her. "What's the excuse for this one?" I asked, my voice flat, emotionless. Jessica's face drained of color. I saw it then, the exact moment she realized there was no way out. Her lips parted slightly, and for a second, she looked almost afraid. "It's not what it looks like," she tried, her voice quieter now, more uncertain. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Oh, because it looks like my wife has been screwing some guy behind my back and lying to my face about it every single day." She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the counter now, her entire body rigid with tension. "It's not like that," she whispered. I laughed again, but this time, it actually felt like a laugh. A bitter, exhausted, completely done laugh. "Then why don't you tell me what it is like, Jessica?" I asked, watching as her mouth opened and closed, the words failing her for the first time in what must have been months. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until finally, she exhaled sharply and dropped her gaze to the floor. "It just happened," she muttered, as if that was an answer. As if that was supposed to make this better. I stared at her, my chest tightening, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. It just happened. That was all she had to say for herself. I had given her everything. Years of my life, my trust, my love, and all she could offer in return was a half-assed excuse and an attempt to make me feel like the villain. I wanted to scream at her, to throw every ounce of my anger into the space between us, to make her feel even a fraction of the devastation she had dumped onto me. But instead, I just let out a slow breath and nodded, pushing off the counter and turning toward the bedroom. "Pack your things," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You're leaving." Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wide, her mouth opening in protest. "Wait, we can talk about." "No." I cut her off, turning to face her one last time. "We can't." And just like that, whatever was left of our marriage shattered completely. The hours after she left were eerily silent, almost too quiet, as if the apartment itself had absorbed the tension and now sat in stunned disbelief, just like me. I should have felt relief, should have been glad that she was out of my sight, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of reality pressing down on me. The apartment still smelled like her. Her perfume clung to the air, to the pillows on the couch, to the sheets in our bed that now felt more like a crime scene than a place of comfort. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the dent her body had left, the ghost of her still lingering even though she was gone. My hands were trembling, not with anger anymore, but with something worse, something raw and gut-wrenching. Grief. Because that's what this was. I wasn't just dealing with a betrayal, I was mourning the death of the life I thought I had, the woman I thought I knew. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head, dissecting every detail, every micro-expression on her face. The way she had gone from defensive to desperate, her voice shifting from righteous indignation to pathetic pleading the moment she realized I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of it. At first, she had fought, tried to turn it back on me, called me controlling, accused me of being paranoid, as if my actual eyes hadn't seen her with him, as if my own home security system hadn't caught her sneaking him in like some dirty little secret. But when the weight of proof became too much, when she realized that there was no version of events where she could gaslight me into believing this wasn't exactly what it looked like, she crumbled. I had expected more fight from her, honestly. Jessica wasn't the type to go down without a battle, and maybe that's what made it worse. The fact that, in the end, she knew she was caught and didn't even have the strength to lie anymore. It wasn't serious, she had whispered at one point, like that was supposed to mean something. It didn't mean anything. And that was the part that infuriated me the most. That she could do something so devastating, so intimate with another person, and then stand in front of me and try to diminish it like it was some meaningless indulgence, like it was no different from sneaking a piece of cake when you're on a diet. It didn't mean anything, but she had held his hand, had laughed with him in a way she hadn't laughed with me in years, had brought him into our home. If it didn't mean anything, then what the hell did that make me? The placeholder? The safety net? The husband she could come home to after she got her thrill somewhere else? I had let her walk out with what little dignity she had left, had given her the chance to pack a bag and go instead of throwing her out onto the street with nothing, but I knew it wasn't over. Jessica wasn't the type to accept consequences. She had always been able to talk her way out of things, always found a way to turn the situation to her advantage, and I knew she was going to try again. She would call, she would text, she would show up at my door with tears in her eyes, saying she had made a mistake, that she didn't mean to hurt me, that we could work through this. And maybe a version of me from a few years ago, the man who still believed in her, would have let her. Would have entertained the idea that this was fixable, that people make mistakes and marriages go through rough patches. But that version of me was dead now, buried beneath the weight of every lie she had told, every touch she had shared with someone else, every moment she had chosen to be his instead of mine. There was no coming back from this, no repair strong enough to put this back together. The trust was obliterated, shattered into dust, and without trust, what were we? I spent the night pacing the apartment, running my hands through my hair, trying to shake the feeling of contamination. I stripped the bed, tore the sheets off like they were infected, because in a way, they were. I didn't know if she had brought him here during the night, but the possibility alone was enough to make my skin crawl. The entire place felt tainted, filled with echoes of her betrayal, and no matter how much I tried to push it away, I couldn't. I barely slept, my mind racing, trying to make sense of something that would never make sense. The hardest part wasn't the cheating itself, it was the deception. The fact that she had looked me in the eyes every single day and lied. That she had woken up beside me, kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, and then walked straight into another man's arms without a second thought. The next morning, the text started, just like I had predicted. The first one was short, hesitant, as if she was testing the waters. Can we talk? I ignored it. An hour later, another. I need to explain. What was there to explain? I had seen it. I had proof, not just of her infidelity, but of the way she had carried it out so casually, as if it was just a normal part of her routine. There was nothing she could say that would erase that. When she realized I wasn't responding, she tried calling. I let it ring out, staring at her name on the screen with a numb kind of detachment. Eventually, she left a voicemail, her voice trembling, filled with the kind of emotion she should have felt before she destroyed our marriage. I don't want it to end like this, she said, as if she hadn't been the one who ended it. I made a mistake, but I love you. I love you. Please, just talk to me. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. But then, an hour later, the shift happened. When the regret and the desperation didn't work, she pivoted. The next text was different, colder, filled with a familiar edge of arrogance. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. It was just a mistake. People work through things like this all the time. Maybe if you weren't so emotionally unavailable, I wouldn't have had to go somewhere else for affection. And there it was. The Jessica I knew would show up eventually. When guilt didn't work, when playing the victim didn't work, she went for the attack, trying to reframe it as my fault, as if my lack of whatever the hell she thought she was missing justified her fucking someone else behind my back. That was all I needed. Any lingering doubt, any microscopic sliver of hesitation about whether or not I had made the right call vanished the moment I read those words. She wasn't sorry. Not really. She wasn't devastated because she had hurt me, she was devastated because she had gotten caught. And now that she knew there was no coming back, she was trying to save face, trying to rewrite the narrative into something that made her look less like the selfish, lying cheater she was. It was almost laughable. Almost. I blocked her number. Then I sat down, took a deep breath, and finally did the thing I should have done the moment I saw that video. I started making the calls. First to a lawyer, then to my bank, then to our landlord. It was time to erase her from my life the way she had erased the us that used to exist. Because this wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the end of everything. The days that followed felt like moving through a fog, thick and suffocating, filled with the debris of a life that no longer existed. The apartment was still mine, technically, but it no longer felt like home. Every room carried a memory, every object was soaked in the weight of what had happened, and no matter how much I tried to purge her presence, throwing out the bedsheets, scrubbing every surface, deleting every picture, there was no cleaning away the reality of what she had done. The betrayal sat in my chest like a slow-burning ember, refusing to die out completely, flaring up at the smallest triggers. A song she used to hum absent-mindedly. A piece of jewelry she had forgotten on the dresser. The faintest trace of her perfume lingering in the closet. It was like living in a crime scene where I was both the victim and the only witness, left to pick up the pieces alone. The worst part was the silence. For so long, my life had been filled with the background noise of us, Jessica's voice filling the apartment, her presence woven into every aspect of my daily routine. Even in the last few months, when things had already started falling apart beneath the surface, I had still been in something, still existing within the framework of what I thought was a marriage. But now, it was just me. No arguments, no passive-aggressive sighs when I left my shoes by the door, no laughter, no sound of her typing away on her laptop late at night. Just this hollow, empty quiet that reminded me over and over again that I had been forced into a new life I hadn't chosen. And despite everything, despite the way she had gutted me without hesitation, there were still moments, fleeting, pathetic moments, where I missed her. Or maybe I just missed the version of her I had convinced myself was real. Jessica, of course, hadn't gone quietly. Even after I blocked her number, she found ways to reach me. Emails, messages from fake accounts, even a letter slipped under my door one night, which had sent a sickening shudder down my spine when I saw my name written in her familiar, looping handwriting. At first, they were desperate pleas for forgiveness, promises that she would do whatever it took to fix things, declarations of love that sounded hollow after everything she had done. But when I refused to respond, the tone shifted. The apologies turned into accusations, the guilt morphed into resentment, and the last message she sent before I stopped opening them altogether was a masterpiece of classic Jessica manipulation. You'll never find someone who loves you the way I do. As if her love was something worth holding on to. As if I should be grateful for the years of deception she had handed me, wrapped in pretty words and empty kisses. I stayed angry for a long time. It was the only thing that kept me from crumbling. The anger was easier. It gave me something to hold on to, something to push against, a way to justify the sheer level of pain I was drowning in. But anger is exhausting. It burns hot, then leaves you cold, drained, and worse off than before. There was no satisfaction in it, no justice, no relief. Jessica was still out there, still existing, probably already weaving a new web of lies, finding someone else to fall into her trap, and she didn't care. That was the part that stung the most. Not the betrayal itself, not the night she had spent with someone else, not even the lies, but the sheer ease with which she had moved on. Because the truth is, people like Jessica don't grieve. They don't sit with their guilt. They don't feel the full weight of what they've done. They shift, adapt, rewrite the story in a way that lets them sleep at night. I could already picture her, sitting across from a friend, shaking her head and sighing dramatically as she painted herself as the victim. He was always distant. He never really opened up to me. I made a mistake, but he didn't even try to forgive me. I could hear the excuses forming, the careful omission of details, the way she would twist reality just enough to make herself seem justified. And there was nothing I could do about it. Nothing I wanted to do about it. I wasn't going to waste my time trying to expose her or get revenge or prove anything. She was her own worst enemy, and eventually, she would do this to someone else. It took a long time to start feeling normal again. I threw myself into work, into routines, into anything that kept me from sitting still for too long. I went to the gym more, not because I wanted some kind of post-breakup transformation, but because I needed an outlet for all the restless energy that had nowhere else to go. I started saying yes to things I would have normally turned down, grabbing drinks with coworkers, taking up old hobbies I had abandoned, even going on a few dates, though those were mostly disasters. I wasn't ready. Maybe I wouldn't be for a long time. And that was fine. I had spent so much of my life trying to be the stable one, the good husband, the man who held everything together. But now I just needed to be me. One night, months later, I found myself standing in front of the subway station where I had first seen them together. It was unintentional. I had been out with some friends, and when I left the bar, my feet had taken me here on autopilot, drawn to the place where my entire world had cracked open. I stood there for a while, watching people move in and out, caught up in their own lives, their own worries, their own secrets. And for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar sting of betrayal clawing at my chest. I felt detached, removed, like I was watching an old movie I had already seen too many times to care about anymore. That was when I knew I was going to be okay. Not instantly, not completely, but eventually. Because at the end of the day, Jessica was just one chapter. A toxic, painful, excruciating chapter, but still just a chapter. And me? I still had an entire story left to write. Time is a strange thing. In the beginning, after everything imploded, it felt like it had stopped altogether, like I was stuck in the same moment of realization, forced to relive it over and over again. But eventually, the days started slipping by faster, and before I knew it, weeks had turned into months. And the version of me who had stood in that subway station watching his wife disappear into the shadows with another man started to feel like someone else entirely. I wasn't over it, not completely. I don't think you ever fully get over something like this. But I was learning to live with it, to let it exist in the past where it belonged, rather than dragging it with me everywhere I went. The anger had faded, replaced by a dull acceptance. Jessica was gone. Our marriage was over. And I was still standing. She had tried to re-enter my life a few times, like I knew she would. The messages had slowed down but never stopped entirely. Every couple of months, she would pop up again, usually after I had managed to go a few weeks without thinking about her. The first time, it was an accidental email, something casual, as if she had just typed my address in by mistake. Then came the text again, spaced out just enough to make it seem like she wasn't desperate but still frequent enough to make it clear that she wasn't done trying. I hope you're doing okay. I saw something today that reminded me of you. Do you think we could talk? It was all carefully calculated, strategically worded to make it seem like she cared without actually apologizing. I ignored them. Every single one. Blocking her number had helped for a while, but she always found a way around it. Different numbers, different apps, even an anonymous letter that showed up in my mailbox one day, though I recognized her handwriting immediately. It was all just another game to her, a way to test how much control she still had over me. But the thing about control is that you can only have it if the other person allows it. And I wasn't playing anymore. I took my time rebuilding. I didn't rush into anything new, didn't throw myself into another relationship just to fill the empty space she had left behind. I focused on myself, on figuring out who I was outside of being someone's husband, someone's other half. It was strange at first, being completely alone. I had forgotten what that felt like. For years, every decision I made had included Jessica in some way. Every plan had revolved around us. Now, it was just me. At first, the silence had been unbearable, but over time, I learned to appreciate it. There was something liberating about knowing I didn't have to check in with anyone, didn't have to worry about what mood I would be walking into when I got home, didn't have to feel like I was constantly falling short. One night, I went out with a few friends for drinks, something I had avoided for months because I didn't feel like answering the inevitable questions. But that night, I let myself relax. Let myself enjoy the fact that I wasn't stuck in the cycle of grief anymore. I met a woman at the bar, not in a romantic way, not in the way Jessica probably would have assumed, but just as two people talking, enjoying the conversation. She laughed at something I said, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was dragging a weight behind me. I wasn't ready for anything serious, but in that moment, I realized that eventually, I would be. I started traveling more, saying yes to things I would have previously turned down, taking trips on my own just because I could. I went to places Jessica and I had once talked about visiting together, but instead of letting those memories taint the experience, I made new ones. It wasn't about proving anything to her, it was about proving something to myself. That I wasn't broken. That I can still enjoy my life without the shadow of what she had done hanging over me. One day, while cleaning out some old boxes, I found an old anniversary card she had written me. I don't know why I had kept it, why it had survived the purge of everything else she had touched, but there it was, buried beneath things I hadn't looked at in years. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Her handwriting stared back at me, the words so beautifully dishonest that I almost laughed. I don't know what I did to deserve you, she had written. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you. I ripped it in half, then into quarters, then into tiny little pieces until it was nothing but shredded paper in my hands. And for the first time since this whole nightmare had started, I felt something close to free. Jessica had been right about one thing. I was the best thing that had ever happened to her. She just didn't know how to appreciate it. And now? Now she was nothing more than a lesson I had learned the hard way. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't waiting for karma to catch up to her or hoping that one day she would regret it. Maybe she already did, or maybe she never would. It didn't matter, because her story was no longer a part of mine. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was finally at peace with that.